So, every year my family does this big gift wrapping night before Christmas. It's become a tradition where we all gather at my parents' house, set up a big table with wrapping paper, ribbons, and scissors, and spend the night wrapping presents together. It's always a little chaotic. Some gifts end up looking gorgeous, while others have lopsided bows and too much tape. We'll throw on some Christmas music, sip hot cocoa, and make fun of each other's attempts at fancy wrapping. This year, I thought it'd be nice to take a different approach. I'd read about these holiday pop-up workshops that teach gift wrapping techniques, where you can learn to make gorgeous bows and intricate designs, and I thought it sounded fun. I figured we'd get a chance to up our game a bit and have perfectly wrapped gifts for once. Plus, they had all kinds of high-end supplies that my family never buys, like silk ribbons, custom name tags, and all these other decorative details. So I went ahead and booked us a spot at a gift wrapping workshop downtown. I thought I'd surprise everyone with it. I figured once they saw it, they'd be excited to try something new. I imagined us all leaving with these magazine-worthy presents and family photos in front of the beautifully decorated tables. On wrapping night, everyone showed up at my parents' place, ready for the usual cozy chaos. They had bags full of wrapping paper and tape, and my mom was even wearing her elf wrapping squad sweater. When I broke the news about the change of plans, everyone seemed confused. I said, "Surprise! I booked us a wrapping workshop tonight. We're going to learn to wrap like pros with all these amazing supplies. It's going to be so much fun." I was expecting cheers, but instead, I got blank stares. My mom asked, "Why? We have everything we need right here." My sister looked around and said, "But the fun is doing it here together, with all our usual stuff. This is different." I try to sell them on the idea. But that's the point. We get to use fancy wrapping paper, make beautiful bows, and learn some new techniques. Think about how amazing all the gifts will look. They still didn't look convinced, but eventually, everyone grabbed their gifts and piled into the cars. When we got to the workshop, everything was laid out beautifully. Glossy paper, satin ribbons, specialty tags, and samples of professionally wrapped gifts that looked like they belonged in a department store. But my family just looked hesitant. We sat down, and the instructor started going over some pro tips for perfect wrapping, but everyone seemed a little too quiet. My sister whispered to me, "This is like really serious. We usually just have fun with it, not take a class." I tried to lighten the mood, saying, "Come on, it'll be great to try something new. We'll learn a few tricks and have the best looking gifts this year." But as the night went on, I could tell no one was really into it. My mom struggled with one of the fancier folds and kept sighing, saying, "This is a bit much, don't you think? I miss our old wrapping night." My dad, who usually takes pride in his goofy, mismatched wrapping jobs, looked completely lost. He tried to joke, "Guess my usual 5 layers of tape aren't allowed here." But he seemed genuinely disappointed. My sister was barely putting any effort in, and at one point, she leaned over to me and said, "It just feels so formal. This doesn't feel like us." By the end, everyone had some technically perfect packages, but no one was smiling or chatting like we usually do. It was just quiet. On the way home, my mom said, "I know you meant well, but I miss the mess, the homemade tags, and just doing it ourselves. This didn't feel like Christmas." Now, they've all said they want to go back to the old way next year, and I feel like I completely missed the point of what made our wrapping night special. I thought it'd be fun to do something polished, but they all seemed to miss the messiness and personal touches of our usual night. AITA for trying to make our wrapping night fancier. My friend Jake has been going through a lot lately. He's been dealing with a messy breakup, pressure at work, and just life stuff piling up on him. He's one of those guys who bottles everything up and keeps saying, "I'm fine," even when it's clear he isn't. I've been getting worried about him because he'd stopped coming out with our friend group, wasn't answering messages, and seemed totally burned out whenever I did see him. So, I decided to plan a little guy's night to cheer him up. Nothing too wild, just something low-key, where he could relax and have fun without feeling pressured. I reserved a private room at a small pub we both like, gathered some of our closest friends, and got everything set up for a surprise evening with his favorite things: good food, pool, and a few rounds of his favorite craft beers. When the day rolled around, I swung by his place to pick him up. I kept things casual, just saying I wanted to grab a drink, figuring he'd be happy once he saw everyone waiting to surprise him. But when he opened the door, he looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. I almost reconsidered, but I figured this would lift his spirits. On the way to the pub, he kept asking questions, sensing something was up, but I just told him he'd see soon enough. When we got there and he saw everyone waiting, he froze, looking more stressed than surprised. Everyone cheered, and I expected him to light up, maybe crack a smile. But instead, he just looked uncomfortable. "Did you plan this?" he asked, turning to me with this tense expression. "Yeah, Ma. I thought you could use a night out. We're all here to have some fun. Take your mind off things." I grinned, still hoping he'd relax once we got started. But he just sighed and rubbed his temples. "I don't know, dude. I'm not really in the mood for all this," he said, his voice barely above a mumble. I try to stay upbeat. "Come on, Jake. It'll be good for you. You've been cooped up for weeks, and we're all worried about you. It's just one night, no pressure." He pulled me aside, away from the group, and I could see the frustration in his eyes. "Look, I get that you're trying to help, but I can't handle this right now. You think a guy's night is going to fix everything, but I didn't ask for this. I just wanted a quiet evening, not a party where I have to pretend I'm fine." I was taken aback. "I'm not asking you to pretend, Jake. We're just here for you. We miss you, and I thought maybe this would make you feel a little better." He shook his head. "But you didn't ask what I needed. You just assumed a night out was the answer. Right now, I'm barely holding it together, and this feels like you're putting me on the spot." I felt my chest tighten. I'd spent time organizing this, rallying everyone, trying to plan something he'd enjoy. I thought he'd feel supported, maybe even grateful. "I just wanted you to know you're not alone in this, Jake," I said, my voice quieter. "I didn't mean to put you on the spot." He sighed, looking torn between anger and sadness. "I know you mean well, but it doesn't feel like support when it's not what I actually need. It just feels overwhelming." I didn't know what else to say. I thought I'd been doing something good, something a friend would do to lift someone up, but I could see in his eyes that, somehow, my gesture had just made things worse. We ended up leaving early, and he went home, while I stayed behind with the group, feeling embarrassed and unsure if I'd completely misjudged everything. I wanted to be there for him, but now I wonder if I just made him feel worse. A few months back, my friend Rachel reached out, sounding desperate. We'd been close in college, but she'd moved out of state, and we hadn't kept in touch as much. She told me she was in a bad spot. She'd lost her job, couldn't pay her rent, and was on the verge of being evicted. She said she just needed a few weeks to find work and save up for her own place, and asked if she could stay with me in the meantime. I thought, why not? I have a guest room, a good job, and I figured she'd do the same for me if the tables were turned. I set up the guest room with fresh sheets, stocked up on groceries, and even rearranged my schedule so I could be around when she arrived. When Rachel showed up, she looked tired but was so thankful, saying over and over how she'd be out soon, that she didn't want to impose. I felt good about helping her out, like I was really making a difference. The first week was smooth. Rachel was up early every day, heading out with her laptop and telling me each night about the job she was applying to. She seemed determined, and I really thought she was on the right track. We spent our evenings catching up on life and laughing about old memories. It felt like having a roommate again, and honestly, it was kind of fun. But by the second week, things took a turn. Rachel started sleeping in later, sometimes not getting up until I was already back from work. I'd come home to find her in pajamas, sprawled on the couch, binge-watching shows. When I asked how the job hunt was going, she'd sigh and say, "I'm waiting to hear back from a few places." I offered to send her some job listings I'd found, but she waved it off, saying I don't want to come off as desperate. Then, the mess started creeping in. Rachel would leave dishes in the sink, crumbs all over the couch, and half-empty mugs everywhere. My usually neat space was starting to look like a disaster zone. I gently asked if she could help out with the cleaning, and she gave me an exaggerated sigh and said, "Oh, totally. I'll get to it." But somehow, later never happened. By week 3, she'd fully settled into what seemed like a permanent vacation. She wasn't leaving the house much at all, staying up until the early hours of the morning watching loud movies, then sleeping in well into the afternoon. When I suggested she look into temp work, she brushed me off, saying, "Those kinds of jobs aren't worth my time. I'm holding out for something that actually suits me." Meanwhile, she was blowing through the groceries like they were her personal stash. I'd find my snacks and meal preps gone within a day or two, and the fridge half empty every time I went to make a meal. When I asked if she could chip in for groceries, she promised she would once she got her first paycheck. But there was no paycheck in sight because, as far as I could tell, she wasn't actually applying to any jobs. One morning, I woke up to find my car gone. Rachel had taken it for a quick errand, but she didn't come back until hours later, with the gas tank empty. When I asked her not to take my car without asking, she just rolled her eyes and said, "Chill, it's just a car. I didn't think you'd mind." She promised to refill the tank next time, but that promise went the way of all her other ones, nowhere. Then there was the incident with her friends. I came home one evening to find 3 of her friends I'd never met lounging on my couch, eating food I'd bought like they were regulars. I pulled Rachel aside and asked her to let me know before inviting people over. She looked genuinely offended and said, "They're my friends, it's not a big deal. I didn't think you'd care." At that point, I felt like I was losing control of my own home. I sat her down and tried to talk seriously, explaining that this was supposed to be a short-term arrangement and that I needed her to start contributing or, at the very least, making some actual progress on finding a job. She stared at me like I'd betrayed her and said, "Wow, I thought we were friends. I didn't realize you were keeping score." She went on to accuse me of having it easy and not understanding what it's like to really struggle, even saying that I was selfish for not giving her more time. I was stunned. Here I was covering everything: food, rent, utilities, and she was acting like I was wrong for setting boundaries. Since then, things have been tense. She barely speaks to me, still leaves messes everywhere, and makes passive-aggressive comments like, "Must be nice to have it all together," or "Not everyone's as lucky as you." I feel like a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around just to avoid her resentment. Part of me wonders if I was too harsh or if I should have set clearer expectations earlier. But another part of me feels totally taken advantage of. I didn't think helping a friend would turn into this nightmare. So, AITA? My girlfriend, Emily, had been really down lately. She's in grad school, working part-time, and trying to balance a ton of responsibilities. She's one of the most driven people I know, but lately, the stress has been wearing her down. She's been so overwhelmed that she barely has time for herself, let alone to unwind. Every time I see her, she looks exhausted, and whenever I ask how she's doing, she just says, "I'm fine," even though it's obvious she's not. So, I thought I'd surprise her with something special, a full relaxation day at home. I figured if she wouldn't take a break on her own, I'd bring the break to her. I spent days planning it out. I cleaned her apartment, set up some cozy blankets, got her favorite snacks, bought some fancy candles, and even made a playlist of her favorite relaxing music. I booked a virtual yoga class and ordered her favorite takeout for later, so she wouldn't have to worry about anything for the entire day. I really wanted her to feel pampered and taken care of. On Saturday morning, I showed up at her place bright and early, holding coffee and a bag of pastries from her favorite cafe. When she opened the door, I grinned and said, "Surprise! Today is all about you." She blinked, looking a little confused. "Wait, what?" I stepped inside, all excited. "I've got it all planned. You don't have to lift a finger. Just relax and enjoy. We're starting with coffee and breakfast, then a yoga class, and later I got dinner covered too. You don't have to worry about a single thing today." But instead of looking happy, she looked hesitant. "I appreciate this, but I actually had things I needed to do today," she said, glancing around like she wasn't sure how to respond. I tried to reassure her, saying, "It's all good. I wanted to give you a break from everything. You're always working so hard, and I thought a day to yourself would be just what you need." She sighed, looking down at her coffee cup. "I know you mean well, but this just feels like a lot. I have assignments due, and I was planning to catch up on some reading. I can't just ignore all of that." I felt my heart sink a bit. "Emily, you've been so stressed, and I just wanted to do something nice. I thought you'd love the chance to just relax for a day." She gave me a soft, apologetic smile, but there was a hint of frustration there too. "I get it, but it feels like you didn't really ask what I wanted. I know you're trying to help, but now I feel like I'm disappointing you if I don't go along with all this." Her words stung. I'd put so much effort into planning the day, and I thought she'd be touched by it. "I didn't mean to make you feel pressured. I thought you'd appreciate a break." She looked at me, clearly trying to choose her words carefully. "It's sweet of you, And I know you're just trying to be supportive, but sometimes support means just asking what would help instead of surprising me with something you think would be best. Right now, I'd feel better if I could just catch up on what I need to do. I felt a pang of embarrassment and disappointment. Here I was thinking I'd done something amazing for her, only to realize I'd totally missed the mark. "I'm sorry," I said quietly. "I just wanted you to feel cared for." She squeezed my hand, giving me a small smile. "I know, and that means a lot to me. Maybe next time, let's just talk about it first?" I nodded, trying to shake off the feeling of failure. I thought I'd given her the perfect gift, something thoughtful and caring, but somehow, it had just added more stress. I packed up the breakfast, told her I understood, and left, feeling like I'd completely misjudged what she needed. Now I'm just wondering if I overstepped or if I was wrong for wanting to take care of her in the first place. AITA? Alright, here's how things played out at my friend Julia's birthday dinner last weekend. I honestly thought I was just sharing my thoughts, but now I'm wondering if I somehow became the party villain. You be the judge. So, Julia was turning 30, and she made a big deal about this milestone for months. She even called it her Dirty 30 Bash and booked a fancy restaurant with a private room. Everyone was dressed up, taking pictures, doing toasts, definitely the vibe of a major celebration. I was genuinely happy for her. 30's a big deal, right? But Julia is the kind of person who loves being the center of attention, so I already knew this night would be all about her. As the evening went on, people were doing little speeches about how amazing and inspiring Julia is. Lots of, "I'm so lucky to know you," and "Julia, you're a shining light." Don't get me wrong, I like Julia, but she's not curing cancer or anything. She's a solid friend, but some of the compliments felt a bit much. It started feeling like we were all hyping her up like she was Beyoncé. Still, I kept my thoughts to myself at that point. When it was my turn to say something, I figured I'd keep it real. I raised my glass and said, "Happy 30th, Julia. Here's to the start of a new decade. You're getting older and wiser now. So let's hope for fewer questionable decisions and even better memories. Cheers to you." I thought it was funny and lighthearted, and I figured Julia would get the joke. But the room got a bit quiet, and Julia's smile looked kind of frozen. A few people laughed, but it was that polite, awkward kind of laugh. After that, everyone kind of went back to complimenting her, and I could tell she was soaking it up. Someone even said, "Julia, you're going to absolutely own this decade. I just know it." And people were nodding like she was about to take on the world. I couldn't help but add, "Absolutely. But remember, with great power comes great responsibility, right? It's not all glamorous." I said it with a smile, and a few people gave me side glances, but I honestly thought I was just adding some humor. Later, Julia was talking about how she felt like she was finally becoming the person she was meant to be. She mentioned all the personal growth she'd been doing and how she was so proud of the woman she's becoming. I totally get it. 30 is a big turning point, and it's great to feel like you're on a path. So I jumped in and said, "That's awesome. I mean, we all have our ups and downs, but it's nice to feel like we're finally growing up, right?" I laughed, hoping she'd join in, but she just nodded slowly and looked away. Then, Julia's best friend, Amanda, started talking about how Julia was an inspiration to everyone and how her ambition and drive were going to take her far. People were nodding and clapping, and it was honestly a bit much. I mean, we're all in our early 30s. Who isn't trying to make the best of life? So I leaned over to the person next to me and said, "Inspiration? It's just turning 30, not climbing Everest." They kind of chuckled, but I noticed Amanda giving me a look from across the table. Things got a bit awkward after that. At one point, Julia came over to me and said, "Hey, I know you're joking, but it feels like you're kind of making light of things tonight. This is a big moment for me." I was surprised, so I told her, "Julia, I am happy for you. I just figured a little humor would keep things fun. Everyone's been acting like you're the Dalai Lama, and I thought you'd appreciate a bit of grounding." She just looked at me for a second and said, "Maybe just let people be happy for me without trying to bring it down." I honestly didn't know what to say. I felt like I was the only one adding a little realism to the whole thing. Isn't it okay to keep things grounded and have a laugh? By the end of the night, it felt like there was this weird tension. People were mostly giving Julia the same non-stop compliments, and I just stayed quieter because clearly my humor wasn't landing. When I was leaving, Julia hugged me but said, Maybe next time, just let me have my moment. I left feeling confused. I didn't mean to ruin her night. I was just trying to add some balance. But now I'm wondering, was I really out of line? AITA for making lighthearted comments at my friend's big birthday celebration? So here's what happened. My cousin got engaged and for whatever reason, decided that her engagement party needed to be an elaborate themed event. Not just any theme, either. It was old Hollywood glam, complete with a black-tie dress code, a red carpet, and tons of over-the-top decorations. She's always had a flair for drama, and the whole family usually goes along with it. But this time, she took it to a new level. About a month before the party, my cousin asked me if I could help her plan and set up. She wanted me to handle everything from arranging the decor to coordinating with a caterer she'd chosen and even setting up some kind of mini photo studio for red carpet shots. I'm usually up for helping with family stuff, but I had a lot going on, work was intense, and I just started taking evening classes to finish my degree. I barely had time to sleep, let alone spend my weekends planning an engagement party. When I told her it was a bad time for me, she got really upset and accused me of not caring about her special moment. She sent this long message about how she'd always been there for me and how I was letting her down by not being more involved. I felt guilty, but also kind of frustrated, so I tried to compromise. I offered to show up early on the day of the party to help set up. I figured that way, I'd still be part of it, but I wouldn't have to commit to weeks of planning. She didn't take it well. She sent me a series of passive-aggressive texts about how everyone else is pitching in, and it's clear who's really there for her. A few days later, my aunt, her mom, called and basically gave me the same guilt trip, saying it was just one weekend, and that families should be willing to make sacrifices. I didn't know what to say. I'd already offered what I could, but they made me feel like I was being completely unreasonable. When the party day finally arrived, I showed up a few hours early, just like I said I would. I helped set up tables, put up decorations, even helped direct the caterers. But my cousin was cold the entire time. She barely looked at me, and when she did, it was with this look of disappointment. At one point, she even said, "Thanks for finally showing up, I guess," which felt like a slap in the face. I'd shown up exactly when I said I would, but nothing I did seemed to make a difference. During the party, I tried to be social and have a good time, but it was clear that I was being iced out. My cousin kept making snarky comments to people about how some people don't value family, and my aunt and a few others were clearly in on it. I ended up leaving early, feeling like I'd done something horribly wrong, even though I'd given what I could. The aftermath was even worse. My cousin unfollowed me on social media and stopped responding to my messages entirely. My aunt called me later that week and said that I had let down the family and that she was disappointed in me for not putting in the same effort as everyone else. Even my mom, who's usually on my side, said I could have tried harder to be there for my cousin, given that this was a once-in-a-lifetime event. I'm still getting cold shoulders from my family weeks later. I tried explaining my side, but no one seems to care that I was swamped and still tried to contribute. They're all acting like I totally blew off my cousin and missed the whole thing, when in reality, I showed up early, helped set up, and stayed as long as I could. I just didn't want to give up every weekend leading up to it. So, AITA? It's strange how this one choice, just not showing up for a dinner, has left such a permanent mark. I keep telling myself that it's not that big of a deal, that Danny will get over it eventually, that he'll remember we're family, and family always comes around. But the more I sit with it, the more I realize that maybe I'm just trying to convince myself that I'm not the one who made this into something bigger. The truth is, I didn't just skip a dinner. I skipped out on Danny, and now I can see that I might have damaged something between us that won't ever fully mend. I always thought of myself as a low-key person, someone who didn't need the rituals, the showing up for every little thing. I thought I could float in and out, show up when it was easy, and that people would understand. And up until now, they always did, or maybe I just convinced myself they did, that understanding meant forgiving or even not noticing. But I can see now that each time I chose my own comfort over someone else's moment, I was pushing people further away. I just didn't realize that those small choices would eventually add up to this. The funny part is I always thought that if anyone in the family would understand my absence, it would be Danny. He's always been the one who keeps his head down, the one who seems to take everything in stride. I thought he'd be fine without me there, that he'd have plenty of other people around to celebrate with him. and I told myself it was no big deal, that he'd barely notice if I didn't show. But that was just me letting myself off the hook, using my perception of him as an excuse to keep things easy for myself. It's almost embarrassing, looking back now, how I shrugged off his invitation like it was just another get-together. I thought his success was inevitable, like it didn't really need celebrating because, in my mind, it was obvious that he'd passed the bar. But now I see that for him, that night wasn't about the bar. It was about seeing the people he cared about in one place, about feeling supported, feeling like all the work he'd done was recognized. And by not being there, I told him that I didn't value it, that his achievement wasn't important enough to pull me out of my usual routine. Since then, every time I see him, there's this awkward distance, a kind of politeness that wasn't there before. He's not rude, not exactly, but it's like he's talking to someone who he doesn't know if he can trust anymore. It's subtle, just a slight coldness in his voice, a quick way he glances past me when we're in the same room. But I can feel it, and it's like a reminder that I let him down in a way that isn't easy to forgive. I've spent nights drafting messages, long explanations that try to justify my absence, that try to make him understand how I saw it. But the more I write, the more I realize that those words would be for me, not for him. Danny invited me to share in something that mattered to him, and I made it clear that his success didn't mean enough for me to be there. And no apology or carefully crafted text will change that. I missed a moment I can't ever get back. In the quiet moments, I feel this guilt settling over me, heavier than anything I've felt before. I used to pride myself on being independent, on being the one who didn't need anyone, who didn't rely on constant connection to feel close to people. But now I'm starting to see that my so-called independence was just a way of keeping people at a safe distance, a way to avoid being there for them in ways that required real effort. And I'm beginning to realize that while I kept people at arm's length, they were still letting me in. Danny was letting me in, counting on me, and I didn't have the decency to be there when he needed me. I keep telling myself that it was one dinner, one missed celebration, that it shouldn't have this much power over a lifetime of memories. But maybe that's just me trying to dodge the hard truth, that even the smallest moments can reveal things about ourselves we didn't want to see. Danny gave me a chance to show up, and I chose not to. That one choice revealed more about my character than I ever wanted to admit. That I've been selfish, that I've been careless, that I've taken the people I love for granted. It's a strange thing, feeling like you've lost a relationship you thought was rock solid. I always assumed we'd be close, that our bond was unbreakable. But now I'm realizing that every relationship has limits, that people have a threshold for how many times they can forgive you for putting yourself first. And I think I've finally crossed that line with Danny. I wish I could reach out, that I could tell him how sorry I am, that I'm finally seeing what I missed. But I keep stopping myself because I don't want to say something hollow, don't want him to think I'm just trying to make myself feel better. The truth is, I missed my chance to make him feel seen. And maybe the only way I can show I'm truly sorry is by letting him move on without me crowding his space with apologies. Now, I'm left with this lingering regret, this realization that sometimes one choice is all it takes to redefine a relationship. I thought family would always forgive, that they'd always understand, but now I see that every relationship, family or not, requires you to show up, to be present, to care in ways that sometimes feel uncomfortable or inconvenient. So here I am, left wondering if I've just been blind to what it means to truly be there for people, or if I was selfish enough to let something so important slip through my fingers. Either way, I can't shake this question. AITA for not seeing what he needed until it was too late, or was this just an honest mistake that's come back to haunt me? A couple of months ago, my friend Eric reached out. We'd been close back in high school, but life had taken us in different directions. He told me things had fallen apart. He'd lost his job, his lease was up, and he had nowhere to go. He said he just needed a few weeks to get back on his feet, find work, and sort things out. He sounded embarrassed, but I could tell he was desperate, and I wanted to help. We'd been through so much together, and I figured he'd do the same for me if the tables were turned. I agreed, thinking it would be temporary. I got the guest room ready, picked up some extra groceries, and told him to make himself at home. When he arrived, he seemed so relieved, hugging me and saying he wouldn't forget it, that he'd be out of my hair in no time. It felt good to be there for him, like I was making a real difference. The first week went well. He was up early every day, out of the house with his laptop, telling me about jobs he'd applied to and people he'd talked to. We'd catch up in the evenings, and he'd seem optimistic, saying he felt like he was finally turning things around. I thought, great, this might actually work out. But after the first week, things started to change. He began sleeping in, sometimes until noon or later, and when I'd get home from work, he'd be sitting on the couch in his pajamas, scrolling through his phone or watching Netflix. When I asked how the job search was going, he'd say things like, "It's a process," or "I've got a few things lined up, just waiting to hear back." I tried to be patient, figuring he just needed time. Then came the mess. He'd leave dirty dishes piled up, food wrappers everywhere, and clothes strewn across the couch and even the bathroom. My clean, organized apartment was turning into chaos, and I felt like I was cleaning up after a teenager. When I asked him to help out a bit, he'd smile and say, "Yeah, no problem," but nothing ever actually changed. By the third week, he was barely leaving the apartment at all. He'd stay up until 2 or 3 a.m. watching loud movies or playing video games, then sleep until the afternoon. The few times I suggested he might want to apply for part-time work just to get some income going, he shrugged and said, "I'm holding out for something in my field. No point in wasting time on random gigs." Meanwhile, he was eating through my groceries faster than I could replace them. I'd buy food for the week, only to find it mostly gone by midweek. When I mentioned pitching in for groceries, he'd laugh and say, "Totally, once I get that first paycheck." But I was beginning to doubt he was even looking. Then he started inviting friends over without checking with me first. One night, I came home to find 2 people I didn't know in my living room, drinking beer and watching TV. Eric was in the kitchen, raiding my fridge like he owned the place. When I asked him to let me know before bringing people over, he acted like I was being unreasonable, saying, "Chill out, it's just a couple of friends." I didn't think you'd mind. I explained that this was my home, and I liked knowing who was there, but he rolled his eyes, saying, "Guess I misjudged how uptight you'd gotten." The final straw came when I found out he'd taken my car without asking. I'd gone to grab my keys one morning and realized they were missing. I texted him, and he replied saying he'd borrowed the car for a quick run and would be back soon. He didn't come back for hours, and when he finally returned, the gas tank was almost empty, and he hadn't even thought to fill it up. When I asked him not to take my car without asking, he just shrugged and said, "Relax, it's just a car." I figured it'd be fine. By this point, I was at my breaking point. I sat him down and told him we needed to talk about timelines and next steps. I explained that this was supposed to be temporary and that I needed him to start contributing or find another arrangement soon. He stared at me like I'd betrayed him and then went off about how some people have no idea how hard it is out there. He said I was privileged and didn't understand what it was like to struggle. He even accused me of being selfish for expecting him to pitch in and give him a timeline. I was shocked. Here I was covering his food, utilities, and rent, and he was acting like I was wrong for setting boundaries. Since then, he's barely spoken to me, only acknowledging me to make passive-aggressive comments like, "Must be nice to have it all together," or "Not everyone's got it as easy as you." Meanwhile, he's still using my stuff, eating my food, and making a mess everywhere. Part of me wonders if I should have set expectations earlier or if I was too harsh. But another part of me feels completely taken advantage of. I never thought helping a friend would turn into this kind of nightmare. Rosie came into my life when I was just starting grad school, a tiny calico kitten with an outsized personality and a love for causing chaos. I'd found her at a shelter, curled up in the back of a cage, barely bigger than my hand, but with the feistiest little meow. From the day I brought her home, she was my world. Through late-night study sessions, job changes, and relationships, Rosie was always there, her loud purrs and playful swats keeping me grounded. For 13 years, she'd been my constant, my friend, my family. So when she started losing weight and slowing down, I told myself it was just her age. But then she began having trouble jumping up onto the bed, something she'd done every night without fail. She stopped eating her favorite treats, choosing instead to hide under the bed, away from me. I took her to the vet, hoping it was something small. But the look on the vet's face told me everything before he even said a word. Rosie had kidney failure, We can try treatment, the vet explained. With subcutaneous fluids and a strict diet, we might be able to manage her symptoms. There's also the option of dialysis, though that's very intense and can be hard on older cats. It might give her a bit more time, but it's not a cure. How much time? I asked, my voice cracking. The vet was quiet, choosing his words carefully. At best, maybe a year with fluids. Without treatment, she'll likely only have a few weeks. I felt the weight of his words crash down on me. The idea of saying goodbye was unthinkable. Rosie had been my anchor for so long, through so many ups and downs. She was Rosie. Her spark was still there. Her eyes still had that mischievous glint. I wasn't ready to let her go. On the way home, I talked to my husband, Ryan, who had grown to love Rosie almost as much as I did. We have to try, right? I asked, almost pleading. Ryan was quiet for a long time, glancing back at Rosie in her carrier, her body curled up tight, breathing shallowly. I know how much she means to you, he said gently. But are you sure this is what she'd want? All those fluids, the poking and prodding. She's already so tired. I don't want her last days to be full of pain and confusion. I bristled, feeling defensive. So, you think I should just let her go? Without even trying? Ryan sighed, reaching over to squeeze my hand. No, of course not. But I think we need to be sure we're doing this for her, not for us. She's older now, and the treatments, they'll be hard on her. I just don't want her to suffer because we're afraid of losing her. His words stung, but I knew he was only saying what he thought was best for Rosie. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that letting her go would be giving up on her, abandoning her when she needed me most. For the next few days, I threw myself into researching every treatment option, reading stories from people whose cats had gone through the same thing. Each success story made me feel a little more sure that Rosie could be one of the lucky ones, that she could have more time if we just tried. Ryan listened patiently as I shared each new finding, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. The way he'd watch Rosie, who was sleeping more and more, her movements slower and weaker with each passing day. I know you want her to stay, he said softly one night, but maybe love means letting her rest. She's given you so much, and maybe now, maybe it's time to give her peace. I tried to push his words away, but they stayed with me, nagging at the back of my mind. I didn't want to lose her, but I didn't want her to suffer either. So I asked Ryan to come with me to talk to the vet one more time, hoping for some kind of sign, some reassurance that I wasn't making a mistake. The vet walked us through the treatments, explaining the process of fluids and dialysis, how it would affect her, and what to expect. Some cats do well with it, he said gently, but with older cats, it's often very hard on them. It's an individual decision. You know her best. We drove home in silence, both of us lost in thought. When we got back, I sat down on the floor beside Rosie, running my fingers through her soft fur, feeling the bones beneath her skin, and I realized she'd gotten so thin, so fragile. She looked up at me, her eyes tired but full of that trust she'd always had in me. I felt a lump in my throat, realizing that maybe, just maybe, I was holding on for me, not for her. That night, I finally looked at Ryan and said, I think it's time. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me as I cried, telling me I was brave, that letting go was the hardest but most loving choice I could make. We spent Rosie's last days spoiling her with love. She got all the tuna she wanted, extra naps in her favorite sunny spots, and long stretches of time curled up on my lap. Each moment was bittersweet, and I kept catching myself, wondering if I was making a mistake. But in my heart, I knew this was her time, that keeping her here would only be for me. On her last day, the vet came to our home, and I held Rosie close, whispering to her that she'd been the best friend I could have ever asked for, that I loved her more than she'd ever know. She purred softly, a sound that broke my heart but also brought me comfort, knowing she was peaceful. She slipped away in my arms, her body finally at rest. Now, every day, I feel her absence everywhere. The house feels too quiet, too empty, and I keep expecting to see her in her usual spots, to hear her soft purrs. I know deep down that letting her go was the right choice, that she's no longer in pain. But there's a part of me that wonders if I gave up too soon, if I should have tried harder, if maybe she would have stayed a little longer. So, here I am, asking. AITA for choosing to let her go instead of fighting until the very end? Did I do right by her? Or was I just too afraid to keep fighting? All right, here we go again. My boyfriend, Chris, and I are just a few weeks away from moving in together, and you'd think I'd be ecstatic. And I am mostly. But what's supposed to be an exciting step in our relationship is turning out to be way more complicated than I expected because apparently we have completely different approaches to, well, everything about this move. Let me set the scene. I'm the type of person who loves a good plan. I've got spreadsheets with a detailed moving timeline, a packing schedule broken down by room, and a list of things we need to book or buy before the big day. I've even color-coded the whole thing to make it easier to tackle in small steps. For me, organizing everything in advance means we'll avoid stress and potential disasters. Chris, on the other hand, his moving philosophy is basically, we'll figure it out when we get there. He thinks I'm overthinking it all and that everything will fall into place if we just take it easy. Our first big clash happened when I showed him my moving timeline, hoping he'd be as relieved as I was that we had a roadmap. But instead, he just blinked at it, then started laughing. "Are we moving apartments or launching a space shuttle?" he asked, grinning. "It's just a move, babe. We don't need to map out every single step." I tried to laugh it off, but I could feel my anxiety starting to bubble up. "It's not that complicated," I explained, forcing a smile. "This way, we'll know exactly what needs to happen when, and we won't end up scrambling at the last minute." He shook his head, still chuckling. "Or we could just start packing when we're closer to the move. We don't need to stress about all this stuff now." The idea of waiting until the last minute made my brain want to implode. But if we don't get things lined up now, we might miss something important, like booking movers early. What if they're all full later, or we end up paying twice as much? He shrugged, looking completely unbothered. "Then we just rent a truck ourselves. It'll be fine. I just don't want to turn this into a huge deal. Let's just pack a few boxes here and there, and whatever's left, we handle on moving day." I felt myself mentally spiraling, imagining us frantically packing the night before, or arriving at the new place without utilities set up, or worse, realizing we forgot something important. But every time I try to bring up a practical detail, he'd brush it off, saying we should relax and enjoy the process. Finally, I suggested a compromise. I told him I'd handle the logistics, the moving company, setting up the utilities, arranging the packing schedule, if he wanted to focus on the more creative things like deciding where things would go or decorating the new place. I thought this was a fair way for both of us to get what we needed, but he just looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Why are you trying to put me in charge of decorating? This is our move together, not a work project. Let's just handle it together, but, normally." I sighed, trying to keep my voice calm. "Chris, this is normal for me. Planning ahead means we're not rushing and stressing later. It's a big change, and I just want us to be prepared." He shook his head, visibly frustrated. "But all this planning is what's making it stressful. You're turning something simple into this intense operation. We're supposed to be excited, not bogged down by lists." That word, intense, I could feel it sting, because to me this wasn't about intensity. It was about making sure everything went smoothly. But he just didn't see it that way. To him, my need to plan felt like I was turning this into some sort of military exercise, and he was looking at me like I was taking all the fun out of what should be a joyful experience. Then a few nights ago, things hit a boiling point. I'd found a moving company with solid reviews and a reasonable price, and I wanted to book them right away so we could check it off the list. I thought he'd be glad I was taking the initiative, but instead, he just stared at me, looking annoyed. "Why are you trying to book movers so early?" he asked, clearly baffled. "We still have weeks to figure this out." "Chris," I said, taking a deep breath, "if we wait, we might end up paying double or find that all the good companies are booked. It's one less thing to worry about if we lock it down now." He sighed, shaking his head. "You're stressing out about something that doesn't need to be stressful. It's just a move. People do this all the time without obsessing over every little detail." We sat in silence for a moment, both of us feeling completely unheard. He wanted me to relax and let things unfold, while I felt like my planning was the only thing keeping us from falling into a last-minute disaster. To him, it felt like I was creating stress, To me, his approach felt reckless, like he was gambling on everything just magically working out. Since then, we've both tried to compromise. I'm working on loosening my grip on the timelines, and he's begrudgingly letting me book movers in advance if it'll help me feel better. But every time I bring up something practical, like setting up our internet or making a list of what to pack first, he gets this look like he's counting down the days until I stop mentioning it altogether. He even made a joke the other night, saying, "With all this planning, I feel like we're prepping for a cross-country expedition, not moving 20 minutes away." He laughed, but I could tell he wasn't entirely joking. I know he's trying to help me relax, and I'm genuinely trying to meet him halfway. But every time I try to go with his approach, I can't shake the feeling that I'm inviting disaster. I keep imagining us knee-deep in unorganized boxes, trying to set up utilities the day we move in, or realizing we don't have a plan for half our stuff. I want to believe in his laid-back attitude, but it feels like I'm the only one who's actually considering the practical realities. Now, I'm questioning myself. Am I really making this more stressful than it needs to be? Should I trust his "let's just figure it out" approach and try to enjoy the process? Or is he just being too relaxed for something this big? Alright, here's the scene. My girlfriend, Sarah, and I are about to move in together for the first time, which we've both been looking forward to. We've talked about it for months, dreamed up what our place would look like, and now it's finally happening. But what should be an exciting step in our relationship is quickly turning into a quiet battle, because it turns out we have very different ideas about how to actually handle this move. So, here's me. I'm a planner. I like my checklists, my color-coded spreadsheets, my timelines. For me, having everything mapped out means we won't end up stressed and scrambling at the last minute. I have a list of tasks organized by priority, from booking the moving company to scheduling when to pack each room, all to make sure we're fully prepared by moving day. Sarah, on the other hand, is a take-it-as-it-comes kind of person. Her philosophy is more like we'll get to it when we get to it. She seems to think my planning is just adding unnecessary stress to what should be a simple process. Our first real clash happened when I showed her my moving checklist, which I thought she'd appreciate. I'd broken everything down by week, with deadlines for finding movers, ordering packing supplies, and confirming our new address with the utilities. I was feeling pretty proud of it, honestly, but when I handed it to her, she just laughed. "Oh my God," she said, grinning. "Are we moving apartments or launching a new business?" I forced a laugh. "It's just a plan to keep us organized," I said, hoping she'd see the logic. This way, we won't have to deal with any last-minute surprises. She shook her head, still laughing. "It just feels like a lot. Why not just pack up a few things as we go and handle the rest when we get closer? People move all the time without this level of planning." Right then, I could feel my stomach knotting up a bit. But if we don't start now, we'll end up overwhelmed. What if we can't find movers at the last minute? Or we end up paying way more because we didn't book early? She shrugged, completely unbothered. "Then we figure it out when it happens. It's not like the world's going to end if we don't plan every detail." And this became a theme. Every time I brought up something I thought was practical, like looking into movers or starting to pack up the things we don't use daily, she'd brush it off with, "We'll get to it," or "Why make it so intense?" To her, my planning seemed like overkill, but to me, her approach felt like tempting fate, like we'd end up with some last-minute disaster because we didn't prepare. To try to compromise, I offered to handle all the logistics, booking movers, creating a packing schedule, setting up utilities at the new place. I figured that way I could get the structure I needed, and she wouldn't feel like I was pushing her to do something she didn't want to do. But instead, she just looked at me, shaking her head. "I don't want to be left out of all the decision-making," she said, frowning. "This is something we're supposed to be doing together. Let's just keep it simple, and we'll figure it out as we go." I felt myself getting frustrated. "Sarah, I'm not trying to take over. I just want to make sure we don't get blindsided. If we have a plan, we'll be way less stressed later." But she still wasn't convinced. "We don't need a rigid plan. Moving's always a bit chaotic. It's part of the experience, and it doesn't need to be this serious." That's the word she kept using, serious. She seemed to feel like my planning was sucking all the fun out of it. Meanwhile, I felt like her approach was leaving us vulnerable to every last-minute hiccup imaginable. It was like we were each convinced that our way was the only reasonable approach. Things finally came to a head the other night. I'd found a moving company with good reviews, and they had a slot available on the day we needed. I told her we should book them now, so we'd have one less thing to worry about. But instead of being relieved, she just gave me this look of exasperation. "Why are we rushing to book movers?" she asked, sounding genuinely annoyed. "It's still weeks away. We have plenty of time." I tried to keep my cool, but I could feel the tension rising. "Sarah, if we don't book now, we could end up paying more, or worse, not find anyone available at all. This way, we have one thing checked off the list, and we can focus on everything else." She sighed, crossing her arms. "You're just making it so complicated. It's a move, not a huge life or death mission. If we can't get movers, we'll rent a truck. It's not that big of a deal." We sat there in silence, staring at each other, both convinced the other one was completely overreacting. She wanted me to relax and enjoy the process, while I felt like my planning was the only thing keeping us from falling into complete disarray. To her, my organizing was a form of stress. To me, her laid-back attitude felt like an invitation for chaos. Since then, we've been doing this weird dance, each of us trying to compromise in small ways. She's agreed to let me book the movers if I promised not to turn every conversation into another checklist session, as she calls it. Meanwhile, I'm trying to hold off on bringing up the move every day, even though I'm secretly keeping my spreadsheet updated and double-checking our deadlines. I'm doing my best to go with the flow, but I'm lying awake at night, running through worst-case scenarios in my head. And I know she's getting frustrated too. She made a joke the other day, saying, "At this rate, I'm half expecting you to write a moving operations manual," which on the surface was funny, but I could tell there was an edge to it. It felt like she still thought I was overdoing it, like I was turning a simple process into a high-stakes project. The thing is, I want to respect her approach, but every time I try to relax, I picture us running into some problem we could have avoided if we just planned better. I keep imagining moving day turning into a mess, with boxes everywhere and last-minute problems we could have solved in advance. And part of me feels like I'm the only one who's actually considering all the practicalities of this move. But now I'm questioning myself. Am I really making this more stressful than it needs to be? Should I just trust her and hope everything works out? Or is she being too relaxed for something this big? AITA? You know how people always say, stay out of other people's business? Yeah, I never understood that. If someone you care about is clearly going off the rails or making bad choices, isn't it your duty to step in? That's how I felt about my co-worker Erin. She's the sweetest person, always bringing in homemade muffins, checking in on everyone's kids, and just generally radiating positivity. But sweet doesn't equal smart. And when it came to her personal life, Erin was as clueless as a toddler with a power drill. It all started about 6 months ago when Erin began dating this guy, Brad. He was the classic walking red flag, unemployed by choice, constantly borrowing money, and suspiciously vague about where he spent his nights. Erin, being Erin, saw him as some misunderstood genius. She'd gush in the break room about how he was working on himself and finding his passion. But come on, who finds their passion playing Xbox at 3 a.m. while their girlfriend pays their rent? I couldn't stand to see her wasting her time and energy on this parasite. Somebody had to save her. So, I decided that somebody would be me. At first, I tried to drop subtle hints. "You know, Erin," I'd say casually, "you deserve someone who brings as much to the table as you do." But Erin would just smile that sunny smile and say, "Oh, Brad's trying. He just needs a little time." Time? He'd already sucked up 6 months of her life. I wasn't about to sit back and watch him drain another second. That's when I started to put together a plan. The breakthrough came during a random office lunch when Erin mentioned that Brad had been borrowing money from her again, this time to pay for some mysterious car repairs. Everyone at the table rolled their eyes, but Erin just shrugged and said, "He promised to pay me back." That was it. I decided that Erin wasn't going to save herself, so I'd have to do it for her. I reached out to Erin's best friend, Amanda, who I'd met at a couple of office happy hours. Amanda was just as fed up with Brad as I was. "Honestly," she said during our whispered phone call, "I've been wanting to stage an intervention for weeks." Intervention. The word lit up my brain like a Christmas tree. This wasn't just meddling. This was a mission of mercy. Erin might hate us in the short term, but she'd thank us later. Amanda and I planned everything down to the minute. A surprise girls' night at Aaron's apartment, followed by a carefully worded confrontation. It was foolproof. The night of the intervention, Amanda and I showed up with wine, takeout, and what I can only describe as the world's most passive-aggressive PowerPoint. We kicked things off with small talk and laughs to keep Aaron relaxed, but after a couple of glasses of Cabernet, Amanda gave me the signal. I took a deep breath, looked Aaron straight in the eye, and said, "We need to talk about Brad." Her face fell immediately. "What about him?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Aaron, we love you," Amanda said, reaching for her hand. "And because we love you, we can't stay silent anymore. Brad is bad for you." "What?" Aaron laughed, but it sounded forced. "You guys don't even know him. We know enough," I cut in. "We know he's been living off your money. We know he's not supporting you emotionally or financially. And we know you deserve better." Aaron put down her wine glass, her cheeks bright red. "Wow, I can't believe this." "We're not trying to attack you," Amanda added quickly. "We're just worried." "I don't need you to worry about me," Aaron snapped. "And I definitely don't need you ambushing me in my own apartment." I decided to go for the jugular. "Aaron, you're too nice to see it, but Brad is using you. He doesn't love you. He loves what you can give him." Aaron stared at me, her eyes wide and shiny. For a second, I thought she was going to cry, but then she laughed, an angry, bitter laugh I'd never heard from her before. "You think you're helping me? This isn't help. This is control. You don't get to decide what's best for me." "I'm not trying to control you," I protested. "I'm trying to protect you." "From what?" she shot back. "From making my own choices? From making mistakes and learning from them? That's not protection. It's arrogance." I was stunned. I'd expected gratitude, maybe a few tears of relief. Instead, Aaron was tearing into me like I was the bad guy. Amanda tried to calm things down, but Aaron was on a roll now. She accused us of overstepping, of acting like we were better than her, of using concern as an excuse to meddle. It was like she'd been bottling up every frustration she'd ever had with us and was finally letting it all out. By the time she kicked us out, Amanda and I were both in shock. We stood in the hallway of Aaron's building, clutching our untouched takeout bags, too stunned to speak. Finally, Amanda muttered, "Well, that went south." "No kidding," I replied, still trying to process what had just happened. Aaron hadn't even let us show her the PowerPoint. The next day at work, Aaron was polite but icy. She stopped joining us for lunch and started declining invitations to happy hours. I thought she just needed time to cool off, but weeks turned into months, and things never went back to normal. Amanda and I were officially on the outs, and as far as I know, Aaron's still with Brad. I don't regret trying to help her. Someone had to, but I can't stop wondering if I crossed the line. Was I really trying to protect Aaron, or was I just trying to control her? I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I'm not so sure. It started with a Facebook event notification. "Come celebrate Kayla's promotion to senior manager." The exclamation mark alone made me cringe. Who throws a party for getting a new job title? I rolled my eyes, clicked maybe, and scrolled past it. Kayla and I had been close growing up, but as adults, we drifted. She was always so extra. Everything in her life was the best, the most exciting, the thing you absolutely had to drop everything for. It got exhausting. So yeah, I wasn't about to give up my Saturday for a glorified networking mixer masquerading as a celebration. When the day came, I saw the pictures trickling into my feed. Kayla, beaming in some tailored navy blue dress, holding a flute of champagne. Her boyfriend, Ryan, all smiles next to her, raising a toast. Their apartment was decked out with balloons, a massive gold "congrats" banner, and a cake shaped like a briefcase with Boss Babe written on it in icing. Cute, but still over the top. I stayed home in my sweatpants, binged a Netflix series I can't even remember now, and ordered Thai food. She'd understand. I wasn't her work friend or her boyfriend. I was her cousin. Family gets a pass for these things, right? The problem was, it didn't end there. A few days later, Kayla posted a long, heartfelt message on Instagram about how much it meant to her that people showed up to celebrate her milestone. She tagged everyone who came, gushing about their support and saying how it made her feel loved. I felt a slight pang of guilt but brushed it off. It wasn't like she'd noticed my absence. She had 20 people in that room. My presence wasn't that important. Besides, I wasn't sure I even had it in me to fake enthusiasm for a cake-cutting ceremony over an updated LinkedIn title. 2 weeks later, I got the first hint that maybe I'd miscalculated. My mom called me, her voice tight. "Have you spoken to Kayla recently?" I said, "No, why?" "She's upset with you. You didn't go to her promotion party, and I think she expected at least a call or a card." My gut clenched. "A card? Mom, people don't even send those anymore." My mom sighed like she was trying not to lose her temper. "It wasn't about a card. It's about effort. Kayla's always supported you. She went to your college graduation. She sent you flowers when you got that big project at work." I winced. She had. Kayla loved stuff like that, grand gestures. But that was her. I didn't operate the same way. "I just didn't think it was a big deal," I said defensively. My mom sighed again. "Well, she does. You should fix it." I thought about texting Kayla, but decided against it. If she wanted to hash it out, she could call me. It wasn't my job to manage her feelings. That's what I told myself anyway. But things got awkward fast. At our next family dinner, Kayla barely spoke to me. When I tried to make a joke about Ryan's inability to cook, she gave me a tight-lipped smile and went back to her plate. By dessert, it was clear she was pissed. I finally pulled her aside in the kitchen. "Okay, what's going on? Are you mad at me?" She stared at me for a long moment, her arms crossed. "Are you seriously asking me that?" Her voice was calm, which somehow made it worse. "Kayla, I didn't think missing your party was that big a deal. You had like 20 people there." She blinked, then laughed, this short, sharp sound that felt like a slap. "Yeah, and you weren't one of them. You're my cousin. I've always shown up for you. Every recital, every birthday, every dumb thing you thought was important. But when it's my turn, you can't even bother to send a text." Her voice cracked, and I felt a wave of shame that I didn't know what to do with. "I just didn't think it mattered that much to you," I said weakly. She shook her head, her eyes bright with tears she clearly didn't want to shed. "It mattered to me. That's the point. You didn't even ask." I stammered something about being busy, about how I thought she'd understand. She just nodded like she was done with the conversation. "Got it? You don't think I'm worth the effort." Message received. Then she walked out of the kitchen. The rest of the night was unbearable. Every time I tried to catch her eye, she looked past me. I've been thinking about it ever since. I still don't know if I'm the bad guy here. I mean, it was just a party. She got her promotion whether or not I was there. But maybe I underestimated how much it meant to her, or overestimated how much being family automatically excuses. When I told Mia I'd pick up the snacks for movie night, I didn't think it would turn into a full-blown argument. We've had our share of petty disagreements before, whose turn it was to do the dishes, who forgot to lock the door. But this one started with a single bag of popcorn, specifically the wrong bag of popcorn. I showed up at her place, arms loaded with chips, candy, and a six-pack of soda. I'd grabbed everything I thought we'd need for our weekly tradition of bad movies and worse commentary. When I pulled out the popcorn, a microwavable bag of buttery goodness, Mia just stared at it like I brought a bag of nails. "What is that?" she asked, her tone sharp enough to cut through the plastic. "Popcorn," I replied, confused. "Like we always have." "No," she said, crossing her arms. "We always get kettle corn. Now here's the thing. We don't always get kettle corn. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we don't. It's not like we have some kind of official popcorn constitution." I reminded her of this, maybe with a little more sarcasm than was necessary. "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I miss the formal treaty on corn preferences?" Her eyes narrowed. "It's not that hard to remember, Alex. I literally always get kettle corn when it's my turn." That wasn't true, and I said so. She brought butter popcorn 2 weeks ago, but she wasn't having it. "No, I didn't," she snapped. "You're thinking of the time you brought it because you were craving salt or whatever." "Oh, come on. It's popcorn, Mia. Just eat it or don't." She huffed and muttered something under her breath. I couldn't make it out, but it sounded suspiciously like so typical. My patience, already on thin ice, cracked. "What's that supposed to mean?" She looked me dead in the eye and said, "It means you never actually listen to me, Alex. You just do whatever's easiest for you and expect me to go along with it." Now that hit a nerve. I do a lot for Mia. More than she seems to notice, apparently. I'm the one who fixed her Wi-Fi when it went out, who picked her up from the airport at midnight last month, who helped her move when her last roommate bailed. So yeah, I fired back. Oh, give me a break. I'm not your personal assistant. It's one bag of popcorn, not some grand betrayal. Her face flushed red. It's not about the popcorn. It's about you not caring enough to get the one thing I actually like. Maybe if you were this specific when you asked for it, we wouldn't have this problem. I shot back. She let out a bitter laugh. You're unbelievable. Do you know how exhausting it is to deal with someone who's always technically right, but completely inconsiderate? Well, sorry for not reading your mind, Your Highness, I said, and yeah, that might have been a low blow. Her face hardened like stone. Forget it, she said. Let's just watch the movie. But it wasn't forget it. The tension was thick enough to choke on. She sat on the couch, arms crossed, while I tried to salvage the vibe with some self-deprecating joke about how this was the worst fight since the great pizza-topping debate of 2021. She didn't even crack a smile. By the time the opening credits rolled, I was fuming silently. Halfway through the movie, I got up to microwave the popcorn because, damn it, we were eating it whether she liked it or not. When I brought the bowl back, she didn't even look at it. I'm not hungry, she said flatly. That was it. I exploded. Are you serious right now? You made such a big deal about the popcorn, and now you're just going to sit there and pout? I'm not pouting, she said, glaring at me. I just don't feel like eating something I didn't want in the first place. Oh, grow up, Mia. It's popcorn, not poison. And you're the one acting like a child over this, she shot back. Do you hear yourself? You're making a scene over snacks. At least I'm trying. I yelled. You just sit there on your high horse like everything I do is some massive failure. Because you don't think, Alex, she yelled back. You never think about anyone but yourself. It stung. I mean, it really stung. And instead of responding like a mature adult, I said the absolute worst thing I could think of. Maybe you should just get your own snacks from now on. Oh, wait. You need someone to drive you there. Her mouth fell open, and I immediately regretted it. Mia doesn't drive because of an anxiety disorder, something I've always supported her with until now. She didn't say a word, just stood up, grabbed her keys, and walked out. I sat there, staring at the untouched popcorn, feeling like the world's biggest jerk. She came back 20 minutes later with a bag of kettle corn and a look on her face that could freeze hell over. Here, she said, tossing it onto the table. Enjoy your perfect movie night. I couldn't help myself. I didn't ask you to go get it. And I didn't ask you to be such an asshole, she shot back. We finished the movie in icy silence. When it was over, she stood up, grabbed her stuff, and left without a word. I haven't heard from her since, and I keep replaying the whole thing in my head, wondering where it went so completely off the rails. I mean, yeah, I was kind of a jerk, but she wasn't exactly innocent either. So, AITA? I thought it was just a pair of headphones. I mean, yeah, they weren't mine, but come on, it wasn't like I took a car for a joyride or raided a bank account. It was a quick grab off the kitchen counter, a spur-of-the-moment thing. I was working from home that day, and my earbuds had finally given up the ghost, one side completely dead and the other buzzing like a mosquito in a tin can. I needed to focus, so I saw my sister's expensive over-ear headphones just sitting there, unguarded, practically inviting me to borrow them. I figured I'd use them for a few hours tops, then put them right back. She probably wouldn't even notice. But of course she noticed. When Lana got home from her shift at the hospital, she stormed into the living room like she was ready to put me on trial for crimes against humanity. I was mid-Netflix binge, headphones back on the counter, when she hit me with, "Did you touch my headphones?" There wasn't even a build-up. "No, hi. No, how was your day?" Just straight to DEFCON 1. "Yeah," I said, already annoyed by her tone. "I used them earlier. My earbuds broke." "What's the big deal?" Her eyes widened like I'd just admitted to keying her car. "The big deal is you didn't ask me, Caleb. Those are my headphones, and you know how careful I am with them. What if you broke them?" "I didn't break them," I said, rolling my eyes. "They're fine. Relax." "Oh, you don't get to tell me to relax," she snapped, crossing her arms. "You don't even know how much those cost, do you? Or how long I saved up for them. You think it's okay to just take my stuff whenever you want? God, Lana, they're just headphones. I borrowed them for a few hours. You're acting like I stole your kidney or something." And that's when it all went nuclear. She started pacing, throwing her hands up, muttering about respect and boundaries, and how she couldn't believe I was this selfish at my age. I fired back, calling her dramatic and reminding her that we live in the same house, so what's hers is kind of mine too, right? Okay, I knew that one would piss her off, but I couldn't help myself. She glared at me like I'd sprouted a second head and said, "You don't get to decide what's yours to take. Caleb, you're 28, not 12. By this point, I was over it. I stood up, grabbed my broken earbuds from the coffee table, and waved them in her face. This is why I borrowed your precious headphones. Maybe if you weren't hoarding the only decent pair in the house like some kind of dragon, I wouldn't have had to." Her face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. Hoarding? Hoarding? They're mine. I bought them. You want decent headphones? Buy your own. Maybe I will. I shouted back. But until then, maybe you could try not being a total psycho about someone borrowing something for a few hours. Jesus, Lana, it's not like I licked them. Oh, real mature, she shot back. You don't get it, do you? It's not about the headphones. It's about you not respecting my stuff, my space, me. This isn't the first time you've done this, Caleb. You think just because we're siblings, you can do whatever you want. That's because you overreact to everything, I said, throwing my arms up. God forbid someone touches something of yours without signing a rental agreement first. You're so uptight, Lana, it's exhausting. Her jaw clenched, and I could tell I'd gone too far. But instead of yelling, she did something worse. She went completely silent. For a second, I thought she was going to cry, but instead, she just turned and walked out of the room. I figured that was the end of it. She'd cool off. I'd cool off, and we'd laugh about it later. Except she didn't cool off. The next morning, I woke up to find my laptop missing from the kitchen table where I'd left it. After tearing the house apart, I finally found it shoved in a corner of the laundry room, covered in a pile of dirty clothes. When I confronted her about it, she just shrugged and said, "Oh, I borrowed it. Hope that's okay." I could feel my blood pressure spike. "That's not the same thing, Lana. You didn't even use it. You just did it like a child." "Oh, so now it's different?" she asked, smirking. "Funny how that works. Maybe you should try respecting other people's things if you don't like it when they mess with yours." "That's not respect. That's just being petty," I snapped. "You're literally proving my point right now." "No, Caleb," she said, leaning against the doorway with her arms crossed. "I'm showing you how it feels. But clearly, you're too self-absorbed to get it." We went back and forth for another hour, both of us doubling down, neither of us willing to admit we might have been wrong. She accused me of being entitled. I accused her of being a control freak. She brought up every little thing I'd borrowed or ruined over the years. Her hairdryer, her nail clippers, a stupid mug she claimed I scratched. I pointed out how she always had to have the final say in every argument, how she couldn't let the smallest thing go without turning it into World War III. By the end of it, we weren't even talking about the headphones anymore. It was like we were dredging up every grudge we'd ever held against each other, and it just kept spiraling. Now we're barely speaking. She still glares at me every time we're in the same room, and I've started avoiding her altogether. I know I could apologize to make peace, but I don't think I'm the one who should. She blew this whole thing out of proportion, turned a minor inconvenience into a personal attack. But then again, maybe I did cross a line by taking her stuff without asking. I don't know anymore. All I know is we're both pissed off, and neither of us is budging. So, Reddit? AITA?